All right, one and all, we are up to G, and G could only be for one thing. What are we all, for the most part, doing here in the paranormal field? We're looking for ghosts. We're ghost hunting. Not all of us, of course. A lot of us just appreciate the good stories, the history, the folklore, and certainly started out that way. And eventually, I thought, well, I'm going to all of these haunted locations on a very regular basis. I might as well bring some gadgets with me. And who knows? Maybe I'll be able to get something. I never started out as a ghost hunter, and I still don't call myself that. I'm a paranormal investigator. I'm a researcher. But again, as long as I'm going out to these places, I'm interviewing the witnesses to write the stories, to cover it, to report on it. I'm a paranormal reporter. Well, I might as well bring the tools of the trade. Plus, as time went by, those TV shows began to come out, and well, I got suckered into them as well. I like watching the paranormal investigation TV shows. And actually, let me drop a quick plug. I just listened to this today. It was so fantastic. I should have put it in the show notes or the description, if you will. But I just listened to the See You on the Other Side podcast with Brian Kano, who you guys might know him from The Haunted Collector and a handful of other different shows. But he was the most recent guest. That's othersidepodcast.com. And I believe that would be /243. Actually, I don't see it on their website. So this is a note to you guys. I don't see it on the homepage, but it should be there. You can also find them on YouTube if you just look for The Other Side Podcast or See You on the Other Side Podcast. That was great. He's a renowned investigator, and he talks a lot about theory and concepts. It took a lot of the wind out of my sails as I was preparing to give my speech today. Good eye. And I wanted to start out with the most two basic, obvious, over-the-top, duh statements, but still it bears saying because you can't not say it. For one, the first thing you do when doing a paranormal investigation is research. I compare it a lot to storm chasing, because that was kind of one of my first really big things that I geeked out on was weather and meteorology. And could you imagine going out into the field, trying to track a tornado, trying to find a very big thunderstorm, and not knowing how that works, not knowing how to read the environment and the clouds and all that? No, you would put yourself in danger. Is what you would do, or you would just waste your day because you have no idea where to look and how to look, what you should be looking for. And so definitely research is number one, both in just paranormal theory, understanding ghost stories, trying to find themes in ghost stories, but also, of course, researching the location that you're going to. And then beyond that, specifically talking with people that saw things. Now, there's a fine line here, and Brian Kano talks about it in that recent podcast, is sometimes it's bad to really know too much because you might bias yourself in one direction or another, which is why when I did my documentary back in 99, I set up this environment where there were three investigators. And this is 1999. This is several years before the Ghost Hunter TV show craze happened. I think it was 5 years before TAPS began to do the Ghost Hunters show on Sci-Fi Channel. So this was not a tried and true genre. We didn't know what we were doing, but there were only three of us, and we didn't call ourselves Ghost Hunters. And I thought it would be a good idea to let somebody with me. I was always the lead researcher, so I knew all the stories about and planned our days where we were going. But I always let one of the two people that I was with, I kept them entirely in the dark. They had no idea where we were going, why we were there, what we were looking for, what the reports and claims were. And that was to keep them honest. And not that they would be intentionally dishonest, but had they known that a place was known for a phantom horse that came charging through, that, well, maybe they would start to make themselves believe that they were hearing galloping off in the distance or something like that. You kind of trick yourself into believing things. So as much as possible, it is good to, if you're going with a group, if you can, keep some people 100% in the dark. I think that's a very important thing. Let's jump in. I actually gave a speech a few years back at Midsummer Scream in Los Angeles, this fantastic horror, or I shouldn't say horror, but Halloween themed convention. And I gave a speech on Ghost Hunting 102, kind of some more advanced ideas. But we will go briefly over a whole bunch of things. I'm getting my bag of tricks, all of my different tools of the trade out. And we're just going to go over. And in the meantime, if anybody out there has any stories, suggestions, any of your own insight you want to share by putting it in the comments, please, by all means, do so. So let's start with the basics. One is a digital voice recorder, which I don't have on me, but you all know what a voice recorder sounds like or looks like. We've all seen them. Reporters have been using them since, I don't know, electricity, more or less. So I think that, as well as an EMF detector, electromagnetic field detector, and this one even says the ghost meter right on it. Those are the two core items. Oh, the other very cliche thing to say that is, it's cliche because it's true, is there is no better instrument, there is no better observation instrument than you yourself. Think about all of the great ghost stories you've heard in your life. The people that had these encounters, were they out looking for ghosts? Usually not. I mean, by all means, 99.9% of the time, no. It's a couple going to make out in the woods. It's a person that's just wandering through an old mall or something like that, and something happens. These people weren't looking for it, but they were there to observe something that happened. So EMF detectors, I consider to be your metal detector. These are just a couple of items that you might keep on you at all times. And then when it goes off, well, maybe that's a place you would start to dig, to ask more questions. And to use the Doctor Who line, it goes ding when there's stuff. Here is a digital one, and here is one where you can see the needle right there. Both equally valid. And the great thing is that when you have multiple, you can test them against each other to in a controlled area. Microwaves give off a ton of EMF. So if you're ever curious, hey, my EMF detector hasn't alarmed in a long time, just walk over by the microwave. If it starts to go haywire, you know, okay, it does still work. It is reading. It is picking up on electromagnetic energy field there. And the theories behind it are, one, most of us, I think, believe that spirits, ghosts, whatever you want to call them, they are made up of energy. And so they kind of give off an energy, an energy that we can't feel. Maybe we'll feel a little bit of a staticky kind of, there's something in the air here, but to have a measurable way to quantify and back up what you feel is a great thing. And as, we don't have a set number, but if it starts to spike, that's usually what would catch your attention. Small spikes, massive spikes. But if it's a constant, no, that's probably your baseline, meaning that in this one area, there's a lot of EMF going on. There were two different houses that I was called on to investigate. One was in Arlington Heights, Illinois, and one was in Evanston, Illinois. In both of those cases, we could not use our EMF detectors because there was so much EM in the air, just in general. Old places, that one was near high tension power lines, and which meant these things, the needles were buried. They were alarming all the time. We couldn't use them at all. But that's also a little bit of a hint that, hey, maybe if you feel like somebody else is in the room with you, well, don't forget the human brain is all about electrical connections, that we are wired beings. And pardon me, if there's unguarded electricity in the air, that can start to wreak havoc on how you perceive things. And paranoia is the number one sensation you would feel, emotional sensation you would feel if you're getting exposed to a lot of electromagnetic fields that are just natural. This is nothing paranormal. Now, the interesting thing is, I always like to try to show both sides, is I'm always steering back towards, well, maybe, but what about maybe? Maybe at these places where we understand why there's so electromagnetic energy in the air, because it's coming out of wiring, coming from the high tension lines, like huge power lines outside. Well, maybe this is an area where it's easier for a spirit to manifest and make their presence known. So it does cut both ways. But anyway, it's good to be aware of it no matter what. $30. I was going to say, I picked mine up for, $25, $30 at Radio Shack. Do those exist anymore? I think there's still probably a few around, but let's not kid ourselves. Amazon, and you should not go for anything high end. The fascinating thing about the voice recorders is the higher up you go, the more refined the tool is trying to be. So it might filter out what it perceives as noise. Well, when we're ghost hunting, we're looking for things that are in that trace, in that small, barely detectable field. And that might be something that a high-end voice recorder might filter out. So the exact piece of evidence you're looking for might be the one thing that gets eliminated from your recording. Of course, everybody uses video cameras, especially ever since the shows. It's what it's all about. So sadly, it's been decades now since you could get a video camera, or at least a decade. You could get a video camera that has what was once Sony's, I don't know if it's proprietary, but Night Shot. It was a little slide switch on the side of the camera here. It goes off on to take this regular hunk of metal from a normal camcorder into an infrared video camera. And unfortunately, people found out that certain types of fabric you can kind of sort of see through. And that was enough for there to be mass hysteria, and they were all pulled from the market, ending consumer level night vision, which is unfortunate. Big time unfortunate, because these are very effective. We think that things might happen around us, but they're happening on a different light wave spectrum, something that our eyes can't perceive. And infrared is one of those light waves. Now you can still find stuff like this. It shoots on a mini DV tape. Again, they're pretty darn old at this point. It's getting harder and harder to find batteries for them and adapters and all that kind of stuff. They are still findable, usually Craigslist, eBay, something like that. Usually fairly cheaply too, under $100. The other kind is a full spectrum video camera. This, I would go to a place like Ghost Village. You could probably search for this. A great thing that I've found is, ghost hunting groups come and go, and every time they go, all of their equipment goes on sale on Craigslist or eBay, and that's where I found most of my gear. This is one such piece. It is a full spectrum video camera. So in addition to shooting in the natural light waves that we see and infrared, as that camera did, this also sees in ultraviolet light waves. So just yet another arena to pick up, activity that maybe our human eyes can't see. And then on top of it, the quote unquote phantom light. And this shoots off the same thing. It shoots out infrared. Let's see how it looks on here. All right. See, to me, you could barely tell it's on right now, but on the screen, which webcams do have infrared. So it's pumping out ultraviolet and infrared light. And you can see that it's working because it looks bright on there and not to me right here looking at it. Let's see, moving forward. Something that I think is overlooked is using a video camera just to document the before. A great example for me is when we did an investigation at Illinois Beach Resort in Zion, Illinois. There was one of the many stories there involved a guy, a couple different people had heart attacks in the gym and locker room. And at one point we thought we heard the sound of a locker door opening, which is one thing that people claim still happens, is that a locker door will open. The locker that belonged to one of the victims will continue to open on its own. So we went in there and we saw that there was a locker door open just a little bit, which of course we all flipped out about, like, oh my gosh, it's real. But then going back and looking at the videotape, we were able to see that, this locker actually was ajar before. So nothing paranormal did happen there. So it's kind of interesting to use the videos to just kind of create, again, a baseline to document what it looks like. And those little details we don't always see with our, you don't perceive that one of these lockers is slightly open. Now, my latest pickup is this. It's Seek Thermal. Now, it's going to be hard to really demonstrate, but you can kind of see that. Actually, there's the drum kit back there. You see giving off different heat signature. So the idea here is that if one of the theories with the paranormal is that ghosts can pull heat energy out and result in a cold spot. A cold spot, of course, being something that we can actually feel very strongly as human beings as we walk into it. But now we can look across the room. And of course, the opposite theory, if it's not a cold spot, if it's a hot spot, well, maybe that's a demonic thing. That's one of the beliefs, at least. But Seek Thermal, it used to be so impossibly prohibitive to buy a thermal camera. I mean, we're talking $5,000 for something that's 480 lines of resolution. Really, really not good quality. Poor. Seek changed the game. They came out just a couple of years ago. I know Bigfoot hunters, cryptozoologists use it a lot, and that you can get something like that for $200, fairly comparatively very cheaply. Staying in the world of thermal is you can get one of these guys, a non-contact thermometer, I should say. And what this does is it shoots across the room and takes surface temperatures. So, as I always like to describe, if you're in a car and you're pointing out the window, well, it's actually not going to take the temperature of the sidewalk or the person or whatever across the way. It's going to take the surface temperature of the window, which is what the first bit of surface that it's going to touch. But of course, the window's down, then it's going to be shooting out the window. The interesting thing is, and in the theory, if perhaps these entities that are out there and creating these cold spots, maybe they still have a surface and their temperature can be measured. This would be able to do that. And I've only ever had one instance where this was very effective. And it was still a mind-blowing experience. And if you look up in my videos, Santa Barbara Mission, this is a place with the Chumash Indians. There was a terrible massacre and unbelievably huge desecration of graves after the massacre. We were in one area, and I thought, if any place is haunted, this is going to be the place, because this is just, the history here is so insanely dark. And I was up there in Santa Barbara on a pretty nice spring day. The temperature was in the upper 60s, low 70s, and everything felt very pleasant and nice. And I was in one area where you could still see some foundations. I think they're actually tanning vats from back in the day. We're talking, near prehistory time. The temperature started to plummet as I was holding it still in this one area, again, over this area that looked like foundations. And the temperatures from the, 68, 50, 45, and eventually it bottoms out at 27 degrees Fahrenheit. We're talking literally well below freezing. Sadly, and then just as quickly, it began to go back up. There's no rational explanation for what happened. So therefore, it just leaves it into the world of the paranormal, which is where we come in. I don't know that there was a ghost standing right there and I was taking its temperature, but it was fascinating. And I've actually showed that video to people at conferences and heard gasps in the audience as they're just watching numbers go down. But still, to this day, I have no idea what exactly was that caused that. And actually, I've heard another good one. Ursula Bielski was using, she bought 2 of these and was testing them out at a haunted house. She's using them together just to verify that they were getting the same readings. And again, on a pretty warm day, the temperatures plummeted in a place that was the haunted location. And very uniquely, both thermal guns were picking up the same thing, reporting the same numbers back. So there's something to that. Oh, one of the big ones now is, let me see if I have a battery for this guy. One of the big things you see everywhere now, possibly because it's TV and it likes to be big and loud, is the spirit box, or the hack-a-shack as they call it. Oh, here we go. And this is just very simply, I don't have the speaker hooked up, so you're not going to be forced to go through the sounds. This is a radio that is very frequently racing through radio frequencies. The idea, I guess there's a couple of ideas. I've always been taught one thing, and I've heard somebody else talk about this differently just recently. But from what I've heard is, for whatever reason, if there's something in the room with you, an entity in the room, it could kind of put its energy and put its message and thought into this. And of course, it would be coming out of the speaker. And the very unique thing, the thing that gives it so much credibility and credence, is if you could get a sentence to come out over this, an entire thought, it would then be traveling over dozens, potentially, of radio frequencies. The same voice, the same sentence carrying on, even though this thing is going rapidly to the tune of 4 radio channels per second, which is impossible. Sometimes there'll be a very strong radio signal that will bleed a little bit onto each frequency to the side. So if something happens over the span of 3 frequencies, not that big of a deal. But if you get the same voice going over dozens and dozens, well, that's unexplainable entirely. And I've only ever had really great experience using this at Linda Vista Hospital in Los Angeles. I may talk about this more when we get to the L's of the alphabet. But one of the things I liked about being able to use it there was we were in a basement, and I actually put this into a huge furnace. So it was this massive stainless steel, thick metal structure. And because of that, it was blocking out all radio waves. So we couldn't possibly get any false positives by any interference. And I was able to get repetitive answers to questions I was asking that related to the question I was asking. Unfortunately, they were never very long answers, but it was always the same voice. It was always this very faint, soft female voice, kind of very weak sounding. So sympathetic, actually, that, you know, I got kind of choked up at one moment because I asked, can you try harder to say more or to do something in the room so we could be sure that we're hearing from you? And it responded back, it's hard. And just the pitifulness of the voice actually tugged at my heartstrings. But we had other success. We were up in the at the top of the building, and I was with this group of people that were not taking it seriously. And I asked, if anybody's here, can you tell us the name of somebody else that's in the room with us? And one of the people in the room, their name came across it. And at that point, at least that person thought, oh gosh, we're not screwing around. This is real. And something is with us. And that something knows my name. That person took it seriously from that point forward. So I think that was pretty much it as far as the tech goes. But, people get too bogged down in tech. It's so easy to collect the gear, collect the gadgets. And I'm just as guilty as it. And I think the most important thing to do is to walk away from it when you can. And there's a belief in Singapore, perhaps, other Asian areas as well. But I do know for a fact that Singapore, their belief is that ghosts are not going to be haunting places where people are. So, you're not going to get too much out of it if you are going and looking. So the best way to try to make contact is to let your devices go, whether it's cameras or audio recorders. Just put them in a reportedly haunted room and walk away and come back later and gather and see, upon review, have you captured anything? And I will say that I tried this myself on one occasion. I was living in a very haunted house in a very rough neighborhood in Los Angeles. We know at one point in time, this house was a beautiful craftsman home from the early 1900s. I think it was 1909. So when the house was built, at one point in time, the second floor was used as kind of a hospice care area. So we know people were checking in and passing away, and then the next customers came in. And I don't know how long it was a hospice type structure, but who knows? We didn't know how many people passed away in the house. And when we took our tour, when we were first looking to rent, Max Tim, my roommate, somebody that you might recognize from some of the other videos, he asked, well, is this place haunted? And the owner laughed and said, no, not anymore. Like, what? So, and it turned out this guy, to him, he's like, the place is haunted. There was activity. It was nothing ever scary, nothing ever big. But I just kind of always knew I wasn't alone. And then one day I came downstairs and the refrigerator door had swung open. It's like, well, now you're messing with my utilities and I can't have that. So knock it off. And he said once he said that, it completely stopped. And I wondered if now that there's kind of a changing of the guard, new people are coming in, will whatever's here test the waters with us. And I never personally saw anything. I definitely had experiences there. And perhaps we'll get more into it at another episode because I can talk for a long time about this kind of stuff. But many people that lived with us, so it was a big house, so we had several roommates, a lot of people and friends that visited, they would see things. They would see a person in a certain hallway right outside my bedroom door. I never saw it. People saw several people at once saw a phantom cat run through the room, jump on a piece of furniture and vanish. Anyway, in addition to that, we stayed, some of our roommates were not good roommates. And I will not leave it at that because they were a very, very, very sadly, unfortunately dysfunctional couple. They both had their own issues and it was explosively loud and at times violent and at times scary. So not a fun place to live. Eventually they moved out and it was still, the tension in the house was, you could cut it with a knife. It was such a difficult situation to be in. And we never knew if they were going to show back up one day. And if they did, what the heck was going to happen next? Because all of their anger at each other began to blow out towards everybody. Eventually, we got the nerve up after a few days of we think they're gone, but we're not sure, to look into the room. And it was completely trashed. Windows blown out, just garbage everywhere. It was destroyed. So, okay, they're gone at least. So this is actually the best we could have hoped for in this situation. And I thought, as the paranormal investigator, thought these people were just up here and there was so much emotion. Have they left a trace behind of what all the stuff they were going through? And could we, as investigators, tap into that using all of these gadgets? So after clearing the room out, we took all the trash out. We took everything out. So now it was just a shell, just a floor and ceiling and a broken out window. We tried it both ways. The first thing I did was I set the digital voice recorder in there and I just let it run for an hour, hour and a half. Put a couple of other gadgets in there like the EMF detectors. And then later I came up and we did an investigation in the room. During the investigation, absolutely nothing happened. However, on playback of the digital voice recorder, while nobody was in the house and while nothing at all was in the room, it was very common in this hour-long recording to hear the sound of something dragging across the floor, to hear pounding in the room, to hear knocking in the room. I have no idea what it was, and I still can't definitively say it was these people, especially with this house that had such history. But nothing at all happened when we were actively trying to engage whatever might be there. But when nobody was there, when it was left alone, there was stuff happening. So I think that's an interesting little lesson to learn, that I think it's a valuable thing to just let the recorders go without anybody being in the space. Another lesson I learned early on, I talked at when I was B for Bachelor's Grove, I talked about the importance of saying that you're about to leave, to kind of give whatever might be there one last chance to say, okay, well, now I'll make contact. Since you're about to go, before you go, I'm going to put the effort in and hopefully make contact, because we've had success, stating that we're on our way out, and then activity happens right then. The last little bit of technique I will talk about and share with you is a lesson I learned on one of the first investigations. It wasn't even an investigation. It was a visit to a haunted site, when going back to video for A's for Archer Avenue. We were at the Willowbrook Ballroom, where Resurrection Mary is said to dance and make physical contact with people and spend the night dancing with them, only then to later vanish, revealing that she was a ghost the whole time. Now, this is certainly a very famous place, an infamous place. I was very excited to go there, but I was not a very polished filmmaker at the time, so I didn't know to do things like, call ahead. And we showed up on a day where it was closed. It was just no activity, couldn't get into the building. We were hoping to be able to tour the location, to interview owners, employees, witnesses, but unfortunately, we were stuck outside. What was the one thing we could do? Well, we could walk around the building and look into the windows and try to just see it for as much as we could. Well, pretty quickly, upon looking into one of these plate glass windows, these massive floor-to-ceiling windows, I saw movement inside this darkened ballroom. And I froze, my blood ran cold, until I slowly put the pieces together that I was looking across a room to floor-to-ceiling mirrors on the other side, and I was looking at my own reflection. All right, so now I turn over to my friends who are with me, and I start to tell them how, I literally just got frightened of my own reflection here at the Willowbrook Ballroom. And as I'm talking to them, admitting what an ass I am interrupted by two loud knocks right next to my head on this huge plate glass window. I jumped out of my skin. I really thought that, hey, if I made contact with Resurrection Mary, I would have the presence of mind to say, "What is your name?" or do you do some sort of an investigation, investigative reporting. But no, I anything that was in my hand was now in the air. I jumped. But what I learned in that moment, and of course, I was able to look into the window. There were no curtains. You could see that nothing had fallen and bumped into the window. There was nothing there. It was clearly something saying hi. But there was something great to be learned from that moment, which was I walked up to that building scared, intimidated. My defenses were absolutely up. And I looked into this building and I felt just as scared. And it wasn't until, oh my gosh, the ice is broken and now I was myself again. And I was joking around and having fun with my friends, that something now reached out to make contact. And you think about it, you are ideally making contact with other human beings. Put that kind of good energy out. If you're going out to try to meet people to say hi, you want to carry yourself like you're fun and approachable. So it's not a bad thing to have fun on an investigation, to joke around a little bit within reason with your friends. But the most important thing I think is, as always, as any sitcom winds up, just be yourself. So those are some tips and tricks and gadgets and tools. And above all, yes, just go out there, you do a lot of research, bring whatever gadgets you want, but don't let them get in the way of your experience being there, because it's very easy to just be overloaded with stuff, and then you're juggling stuff and your mind is on that, and that's not what you want. I love stuff that you could set down and walk away and you can see the reportings later. Oh, I wanted to really quickly also talk about, there's so many phone apps that claim to be ghost hunters' best friends. And so what's real, what isn't real? I'm not going to name any of them by name because I don't know what any of them are called, but what can you or can't you trust on a phone app? EMF detector is a positive. And again, just like I was talking about testing out your own EMF detectors to make sure they work. And also in C is for cemeteries. I tell a good EMF detector story. So if you haven't seen that yet, definitely go back. The Altadena Mausoleum. But EMF, your phone can detect EMF, and I have tested it out with EMF detectors going up to anything with a power source, and it does actually read correctly. Certainly, these could be used as audio recorders, voice recorders as well. And the last thing I would use these for is there are some very, very expensive in the ghost hunting world devices out there that measure vibration. And they're probably very expensive because they are very sensitive, and your phone probably won't be as sensitive, but people use them to detect phantom footsteps. Are these just sounds, or is there actually phantom footsteps walking across and vibrating the floor? Your phone will pick up on vibrations like that. Maybe not as high sensitivity, but still there is some value to it. So that is what I'd use it for. Certainly there's your photo and video app as well. There's some fake infrared ones. Don't use those apps. Those are just filters. But you can get the Seek Thermal, and then you get the real deal. And I guess that's about it. Oh yeah, so don't use. I'm so skeptical of the ghost box. The what do they call it? I'm even blanking. Not the ghost box, because people call this the spirit box or the ghost box, but the Ovilus, they call it, where words will come out. I'm not saying that those are incorrect, but I'm having a tough time believing in it. But the ones on the phone, I think, are absolutely, they're just entertainment. And there a lot of them now, unfortunately, have this like sonar sweep, like you're in an old Russian sub, and it's saying, "Oh, there's a ghost over there." That's absolutely entertainment. I actually talked with a phone app developer that knew about those, and he said, "No, it's entertainment." I mean, I knew that, but now I can report it with authority. Somebody else said so. Something else. The more I talk, the more I remember. Dowsing rods. Whenever you can, go back to basics. Get away from electronics. Electronics are actually kind of interesting because sometimes you'll get battery drain, and then something will happen. So there's something there, some entity there that's pulling energy out from your device to maybe be able to do something. So you might end up helping them in the process, which is a good thing. But anytime you can go basic, just go back to the Victorian era. They would do things like they would have a bell hanging in a bird cage, and if the bell rang, well, how did somebody do that? You would have to go in there and flick it, but the cage is closed off, so you couldn't do that. And another one from that era is dowsing rods. Probably predates that era. Those things freaking work. And the thing is, it's dumbfounding. Nobody seems to understand why. And I've seen show after show after show of skeptical people saying, "Well, give me those." And then it works, and they are dumbfounded. And there's a great one. If you go onto the Instagram for What's Your Ghost Story, you'll see video of Josh Gates over here, Mr. Destination Truth, Expedition Unknown dude, using dowsing rods against his will almost, and then just saying, "Well, I don't know why, but it works." And I will say, I was in Mundelein, Illinois. I was at the Mundelein Seminary, this very old, absolutely beautiful location. And I'd always heard about dowsing rods, and the idea, if you haven't seen them, they are these long L-shaped rods, very shorter handles, and then you usually have a kind of a sheath over it so that your hands won't actually prohibit or influence the turning of the rods. If you were to move the sheath, it wouldn't influence the rod. You angle them slightly down so these long metal pieces are falling straight forward, directly in front of you, parallel. and the force of gravity is pulling them in that direction. And if you were to ask a question and say, if anybody is here, please cross the rods to say yes. And thank you, Barbara, for stopping by and saying hello. Welcome. If the rods cross, that means they actually have to defy gravity to do that, which doesn't make any sense. And you could ask questions if you are one of the really interesting things at the seminary in Mundelein, Illinois, was Ursula Bielski was holding the rods facing forward. And she asked, assuming that she was talking with a man, because it was a seminary, it was a priest school, if you are a man, cross the rods. And instead of crossing to say yes or staying still to do nothing, they shot backwards, whipping all the way around till they hit her in the arms. Like, okay, you are really not a man. And at that point she realized that, I guess, there were caretakers, there were nuns, there were females that would have been here as well. But at least it was a nice person who definitely was not a man. And she got to get the response yes of did you die in this room? And then holding those rods, she asked, can you point to where in the room you died? And both pointed over towards one corner, which is perhaps where a bed used to be once upon a time. I will say that time was the first time and one of the only times I've ever picked up dowsing rods in my life. And I was excited about it because I've always heard about them. Didn't really know what to expect. But originally always heard about people using dowsing rods to find water. And I had a great grandparent who made a living saying, I can promise you I will find drinkable water on your land with these dowsing rods. And he had apparently enough of a success that he was able to do that. That was his business. So we have some dowsing DNA in the family bloodline. And so first I picked it up and I think of what I would think of. I thought of water and the lines that the rods were not turning at all. And then I thought, well, people are using these for ghost hunting now. And a lot of people use them for ghost hunting to just kind of like a metal detector, walk around, you're holding them forward. And ideally they would cross if you came in contact with some unseen entity. So I start to think about ghost, spirit, things along those lines. Nothing's happening. And then I thought, well, let's start with what I know is here. Hardwood floor. And just as quickly as I had that image in my head, these things defied gravity and crossed right in front of me. And I just had chills throughout my body. I set them down on the nightstand. And I don't know if I've never really used them since. It was weird. It kind of freaked me out that these things are moving. They shouldn't move, but they're moving and they're in my hands. And I know I'm not doing it. And in the meantime, I have still brought them out on investigations and I've let other people use them and people that I trust only. And again, if you go back and look at the Illinois beach resort investigation, that's a couple years old now, it's on my channel. You'll see Jeff McLean. Jeff is a guy I definitely trust. He's not a ghost hunter. He's not an investigator. And he is a religious person. So I think that's noteworthy to say because, this kind of challenges in some ways what we believe and understand. And some people have difficulty with religion and ghost hunting. I'm not even going to get into that topic, but that's several books in and of itself. But he was holding these dowsing rods and sometimes he was asking questions. Other times people in the room were asking questions, but these things were moving like crazy based on what was being asked. And it shook him to his core. At one point, the rods got kind of close and you could hear them clanging against each other because he was shivering. It was like affecting him so much how scary it was. But dowsing rods, as much as I'm making it seem like the Ouija board, which I don't use the Ouija board. I don't really have, I've just heard stories. So I've never used a Ouija board and I don't really plan on it. I don't think there is evil at all, but still I have no need. I've got enough stuff in my carry-on. But anyway, so if anybody has any of their own suggestions or advice, favorite ghost hunting tool, leave it in the comments below. If you have a link to a video where you got some amazing success going to a haunted site, trying to make contact, please leave comments. Write it right here at YouTube. Subscribe, click that bell button. I'll be coming back A through Z. We're covering the entire alphabet. We're just up to G, so we've got a long journey ahead of us. And head over to facebook.com/what's your ghost story. I have a couple of letters lined up, but I'm taking audience suggestions for the letter I, and then we'll have a vote, and whoever gets the most votes will be the winner, and I will be forced to cover whatever it is that you insist that I cover. Until then, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow.